Let's talk about spirits for a moment. There's something I hadn't ever sought out when I was younger, but more of something that sought me out and found me when I wasn't looking. A lot of us talk about shadow people or seeing something out of the corner of your eye, and I think that's something that a lot of people experience, and I don't find that to be unusual. What I do find unusual is that a lot of the times with me, the shadow people don't disappear before I have a chance to gaze at them a little bit longer, or sometimes a lot longer. It's been that way for me since at least 1994, but I'm not starting there today. I'm starting a little bit more towards the middle because that was the first encounter I had with a spirit that was outside of a place like my childhood home where I felt relatively safe. So during the spring of 2002, I started exploring. Something that people call Herb X now was just kind of wandering around and finding stuff when I was a teenager. It was just a few teenagers being curious. You get your driver's license, your first car, and you just want to go out and do stuff. So myself and a loosely assembled group of randoms would sometimes go out and just find something to do. Explore dilapidated buildings, cemeteries, whatever it is we found. And we did this at least a few times a month. And I call them a loosely assembled group of people because it was never more than just myself and a couple other people that were really randomly thrown together. It was anybody that I happened to be hanging out with and bored on a weekend, and we just needed something to do. Now, Alpharetta, Georgia, where I'm from, still had some dilapidated gems of vacant buildings back in that time, where people could just kind of explore out of curiosity. A lot of times they'd go out there and drink or do drugs or vandalize, cause problems, whatever, but just abandoned buildings. And one of them was called Hopewell Elementary, and it was just a small elementary school that had been closed down since like the late 1970s. It was kind of in the middle of nowhere in a field. The only reason it actually closed was because the population outgrew the capacity of the school. A new school was built, so it was just kind of left there to rot. And it was just an old brick building, maybe 10 classrooms, situated in a fairly open field with weeds that were tall enough to like reach your chest. And of course, there are all sorts of rumors about hauntings or stories why the school closed for nefarious reasons, and they were well traveled within the city. Everybody knew them, but none of them were true. The building was far enough in that you could easily park a car behind it and be entirely undetected from the main road. No one would see you back there. The first time we went at night, because of course we did, that's what you do. And I also went back a few times over that summer, but the only reason I went back was because of what happened on that first night that we were there. I went there with two friends and I drove all of us there in my Jeep Wrangler. It was a nice day, top down, doors off, of course. We all had our flashlights, like the long, heavy aluminum types that have a stack of batteries inside of them that a lot of people would take hunting or you'd use for, I guess, hitting people with. The kind that could be used as a weapon if you had to. And the thing is, at this time, there was only one way in and one way out of the building. You had to go straight through the front door because all the other perimeter doors had been chained shut. And that front door was the one that everybody, like, I guess, vandalized and ripped to pieces to get into that door. So once you were in, you had to leave the same way that you went in. It was your standard, generic, local, spooky fare. It smelled moldy and musty, and an entire generation of people prior to us had already gone in there and caused damage and problems, so everything was pretty dilapidated, beat up, and destroyed by that point in time. One thing that was weird to me is that there were some stacks of children's books laying around, like workbooks and stuff that were kind of still stacked up in different places, and you could open them up and find like kids' handwriting in them from like the late 70s, and that was interesting. I wouldn't necessarily call it freaky or scary or anything because it was a school, so stuff is gonna be in there. I'm just kind of surprised that it was able to stay in there like 30 years without being disturbed or thrown out. So to me, it was more about like historically interesting or how things have deteriorated over time, not so much about this is spooky or scary, maybe about like what kind of crazy person might be hanging out in here or whatever. My bigger fear was that we would run into someone that was drunk or high, kind of out of their minds running around in there. It wasn't so much the other stuff. But that was until we walked into the cafeteria. Like any other school lunchroom, the cafeteria was just a large open room with a big stage built into the far end of it that maybe had like a 2-foot step to get up from the floor level onto the stage. The kitchen was off to the right with a big open serving window on that side of the room. And then just to the left of the stage, there was this big heavy steel door with no windows in it that was just there. So we walked through the kitchen for a bit, and then after we saw more of kind of the same decay kind of stuff, we decided to walk over to that door and try it, see if it would open. And it was rusty. It had one of those tall vertical handles on it that had a thumb button to unlatch it. But then over the latch of the door, the striker, there was a security plate so that you couldn't, stick something beside it and slide the striker over to open the door. You could tell nobody had actually been in that door in a long time because it swung outwards towards the cafeteria, and there were like footprints on the outside where people had tried to kick it in the opposite way that it was supposed to swing. There were dents all over it and shoe marks, and people had tried to pry it open, and it didn't seem like anybody had been successful. And this is the part I don't remember quite as clearly about everything else. Now you have to remember there was just a bunch of junk, a bunch of stuff thrown into this entire building. So there was all kinds of stuff laying around. And one of my friends found something to try to pry that security plate off of the door so that he could maybe get into it. And I don't remember what it was. It could have been anything, but like I said, there's things laying around everywhere. So that's really not important. Whatever he had used to try to get in there actually snapped the security plate off of it. At that point, he reaches into his pocket, pulls out his pocket knife, and was able to slide it next to the door striker, and then the door opened. And then that smell hits you, that nasty, really strong, musty smell that tells you, like, nobody's been in here in a long time. Like, this room has been shut up for a very long time. So when you walk into that room, you're actually standing on top of a grated steel platform. So you're overlooking this room that's like 10 feet below you, all concrete walls and floors and everything. To the right, a staircase goes down into the bottom. And this room looks like a standard kind of utility room. There's pipes everywhere. There's electrical conduit. There's a boiler for the furnace, all kinds of stuff. Didn't look like really anything important other than just a maintenance type room. I'm interested in stuff like that. It looked pretty well preserved, so I want to go down there and look in it. My friends really didn't care that much about it, so I said, okay, well, I'll just take my flashlight and go down there, look around, see what's down there. Maybe there's something cool. I don't know. So I just walked down there, just me and my flashlight. My buddies were standing at the top of the stairs, and I got down to the bottom, started looking around, and it really wasn't all that interesting. There was nothing interesting down there. It was just a bunch of pipes and conduit and a boiler, like I thought it was. Didn't really find any treasures or anything. It was just a room of utility stuff. But then, just as I was about to head back up the stairs, I heard a creak, and the door shut and clicked. Now, when that happened, I didn't freak out. I didn't panic because I knew what was going on. I knew my friends decided to step away from the door and close it behind me to trap me down there. They wanted me to freak out. They wanted me to have a reaction to it and come rolling up the stairs and bang on the door and whatever else. Why? Because teenagers are assholes. So instead of amusing them, I decided to just stand there. And that's when the life-changing moment happened. My flashlight died. Complete blackout. And I'm still at the bottom of the stairs. Even when that happened, I didn't necessarily have a sense of panic. I just sat there kind of twisting the top of the flashlight, hoping that it was a loose connection and that it would start shining again and I could actually see what was in front of me. And then I smelled it. That damp, moldy, musty smell completely dissipated and went away. And then I suddenly smelled that unmistakable aroma of a burning cigarette. It's unmistakable to me because that certain smell reminds me of being in the backseat of my grandparents' car when I was a kid with my sister, and them having the windows cracked, and you could smell the cigarette smoke because it was blowing right back at us. But not just that. There's also a certain smell of a cigarette when you're right next to someone and you can smell it on their breath. It's not just the smoke smell itself, but it's like that breathy smell that you smell as it's actually exhaling from someone's lungs. And I could smell that familiar smell along with that chain smoker breath. And that was when I turned around to face the corner, and in that corner of the room, I saw a burning cigarette ember in the distance. No more than 10 feet away, I could clearly see the ember of a cigarette. At that point, I'm definitely having a panic, and I very, very softly said hello. Because I couldn't speak loudly, I could only speak as loudly as I could exhale. And I was breathing very softly at that point. A few seconds went by after I said hello as faintly as I possibly could, and from the corner of that room in the direction of the burning cigarette, I heard a very soft voice say, "Wait." Immediately after I heard that from the top of the stairs, there was a creak and a click, and a cascade of light coming out of that door swept across the room from the right side all the way to the left, as I'm still fixated on this burning cigarette in front of me, about to see who's there. And as that light moved across the room and hit the corner of my fixation, I was able to clearly see a person about my height, a man, with long brown hair, hand at his mouth, and taking a drag of a cigarette. But as soon as I made out his entire face, he completely disappeared. And as I turned around and looked back up the stairs at my friends who were now standing up there shining their flashlights down, I looked to my right and I saw another beam of light because my flashlight was now on again and pointed at the opposite corner of the room. Then, of course, one of my friends screamed down, "Oh man, I thought you would have freaked out or something." Oh well. And then he was holding the door for me as I walked right back up the stairs that I had originally come down. And before I closed the door, I looked back down there. I shined my flashlight in the corner where the cigarette man had been. It was empty. The entire room was empty. No man, no cigarette lying on the ground, just the empty room. And I tried to hold it together and act as normal as possible because I had no idea what had just happened. I was still processing stuff. I didn't want to draw attention to it. I didn't even know how to react to it. So I did ask my friends as we're walking out if they ever smelled the cigarette smell from anywhere in the building. And of course, they said no, they had no idea. It didn't smell like cigarettes where they were. And since my friends hadn't really seen anything other than a building full of junk, they were kind of bored of the whole thing and decided that we should just leave. To this day, since 2002, I have not told either of them what I saw in the basement. And to this day, I don't know exactly how long I was down there. For all I know, it could have been a few seconds, it could have been 10 minutes, it could have been half an hour. I really don't know. My time just kind of stood still when I was down there. But I remember it all very vividly. And I carried that night with me from that point forward. So I've had a few experiences with the supernatural before that point. And I had increasingly more of them as the years went on and I got older, which of course have carried on until today. And I actually did eventually figure out who the man in the basement smoking the cigarette was. That man I met that may or may not have actually met me. But I'll have to tell that in another story because it goes so much deeper. It is so much more convoluted and nuanced. It goes all the way back to when that school was actually still open. And it continues on and starts again 6 years after I met the guy in the basement. So I'll have to continue this a little bit later. Because, like I said, it's a long story, and I'm not going to tell it all at once. I'll see you soon.